Good morning and welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, Building Yunesit'in Quen Fire Stewardship Program Insights from the Field. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples, and please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat below. Today's learning circle will be the Building the Yunesit'in Quen Fire Stewardship Program Insights from the Field. I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves in just a few moments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Seraine Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I'm Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Joining us from working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Nicole, our production assistant. They'll be in the chat, interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that today's topics may be covered, may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you are looking after yourself, and if at any point you feel that you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat below. Now I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. I'll be honest. My name is Russell Myers-Ross. I'm from Yunesit'in government, and yeah, I was originally, when this program started, originally the chief from 2012 to 2020, and then I've continued on with this project work.
Hi everyone, I'm William Nikolakis. I help support the work at Yunesit'in through the Gathering Voices Society. I'm also an assistant professor at UBC at the Faculty of Forestry. So this work is on the left. You have a cultural burn on Yunesit'in territory. It's a cool burn that trickles across the landscape and revitalizes the landscape. And this work is about how we revitalized and are starting to rebuild a fire stewardship program that's grounded in Indigenous knowledge and practice. But we're also bringing in Western science into this work. So this work talks about how we're learning by doing in this work. So in this discussion today, we'll discuss some of the context, our approach to this program, what the program is, our goals, some of the outcomes, the knowledge mobilization that's such a critical piece of our work, and thinking about program sustainability. How do we maintain this over the long term, not just a project-based approach, but a long-term program that we can meet some long-term goals. So Russ, I'll hand it over to you to talk about the context.
Yeah, I guess you can see the slides here. You know, I might just preface it by saying, like, during 2014, that South Coteen, you know, we went from, I think, 1989, going through a trial regarding whether or not Aboriginal title existed in Canada. And it wasn't until 2014 when the Supreme Court of Canada sort of declared certain areas Aboriginal title and affirmation of Aboriginal rights. And from that point on, you know, South Coteen have been sort of given a little bit more, I don't know, I guess sort of negotiating power in a sense, and have entered negotiations around lands and stewardship, and have had more fruitful discussions with government around jurisdiction and yeah, different activities on the land. So yeah, it's sort of, it's still a lot of internal work within the South Coteen Nation in developing sort of land use plans and looking at how sort of the shape of the, you know, forestry will take place. So this might be the, you know, sort of re-envisioning the idea of it, but also like the, you know, that South Coteen is also like almost 90 to 99% predominantly pine forests, and it's sort of it's quite a vulnerable forest. It's been hit by pine beetle. There's sort of been climate change has changed drastically in the temperatures, and it just requires a lot more rethinking about how forestry plays out. In 2017, we were hit by one of the largest wildfires in sort of our modern history, but it affected Yunesit'in directly. You see that picture on the left? That's actually my community. That's just like yonder from me here, but it got very close to going right into burning people's homes within that fire. And so, my work with William and Gathering Voices Society was, originally, what can we do? How can we prevent this in the future? How can we actively, proactively make sure that this doesn't happen again, and that we're bringing back, our forests back to their natural state? And so that's sort of where the partnership really took off. And then it's sort of been our vision that it's sort of been a vision through learning, but one that's aimed at prevention, one that's aimed at regeneration, but it also has a huge cultural dynamic of like how do we instill within ourselves as South Cotean people or people within our community to take responsibility over land management and stewardship. So I'll just preface it as that.
I'll take a first go at this, Russ, and if I miss anything, feel free to weigh in. So the approach has been to just it's a very practical approach, and learning by doing, getting people to conduct this work. Obviously, there's safety measures, planning, but it's one of those things where we're out there learning by doing, learning as we go, reflecting, and doing the work, being very practical. And the work's not limited to just a few small segments of the population. We invite everyone to come along and engage in this work, whether it be elders, youth, all sections of the community, women, men. It's an open door policy so that everyone is engaged and feels ownership over the project. And a key part of what we're doing is we're rebuilding Indigenous knowledge, not only from Canada, but we brought Victor Stephenson from Australia along to learn about his approach and methodology for cultural burning, and then strengthening the knowledge that we have in the community. And then we're combining this with science. So we have continuous monitoring and evaluation. So we're learning about some of the effects of the burning. Russ, have I missed anything in this approach?
No, just a little bit, maybe the context too, like re-establishing something like this. For us, it's not like we've had this continuous, fire stewardship over, it's happened for, generations and generations, and then there's been this disruption, whether we call it colonization or just probably around the era where, children were taken to residential school. It's probably from the beginning of that till now that we haven't been practicing it on a consistent basis. And so we have, some reliance on some elders that know bits and pieces, and then, but like that whole learning by doing, it is really, we have a lot of people that have a real strong connection to land, but it's also trying to bridge all those gaps and try to learn as fast as we can, and try to keep this work as generational as possible. So I don't know, that's sort of the approach, because we're just piecing together our understanding about the land or our connection to the land to this practice. But we're definitely in a sense not learning from scratch, but still building on sort of the knowledge that we have about the land.
So a bit about the program. It's 2 low intensity cool burns. So we don't burn, the fire doesn't burn hot. So we apply fire, Typically, we apply fire is applied through matches or lighters. We've had a bit of a debate about applying drip torches and fuels to the landscape, whether this is what we want to be doing. In some cases, you have to because of just the material that's there. But our goal is to move away from using drip torches. And there's 2 burn windows a year where we have the weather that's really good for applying these low intensity cool burns that can trickle across the landscape and remove some of the dead matter, dead grasses, cured grasses. As we mentioned before, there's an open door policy for hiring and training. We don't have specific people in mind in terms of who we hire and train, and we conduct monitoring and evaluation. So we use the scientific basis for ensuring that what we're doing is we understand what we're doing. Russ, anything you want to add on that?
No, just in the recruitment, it's definitely like a challenge for us because they're such small windows. So who's available during those small, month or month and a half long times is sometimes a variance, and it changes every year. But for Yunesit'in, it's been interesting because we always get sort of a multi-generation, from young people to older people, and yeah, we like to include youth when possible as well. So yeah, so we're trying to make it so it's not like sort of like sometimes the BC Wildfire Service that has mostly male dominated young kids from 20 to 18 to 25 or so, but we want to make sure that for our community that the knowledge is passed down and that it stays with us for a long time.
So we conducted community work early on, and it's been very ongoing in terms of what are the goals. And Russ, I'll turn to you to kind of add some detail to these and provide some context. But there was a number of goals that the community wanted from this work, and the first one was revitalizing the connection to land and that duty, that sacred responsibility to steward the land. That was really core at what this program that people wanted from this program. There's also the importance of culture, revitalizing culture, health and well-being, and spiritual goals. So that connecting to the land and healing the land, that community members wanted to heal the community as well in that process. And just on the health and well-being aspect, there's been a lot of work in Australia around what are the health and well-being outcomes from people stewarding their lands with fire or in other ways, caring for country, as they call it in Australia. And there's some really positive, the studies are showing really positive effects from people stewarding the land in terms of reductions in lifestyle diseases and feelings of well-being. So we've got a program, a project that's monitoring and evaluating the outcomes from this program that's been funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. So we've got this ongoing monitoring and evaluation program around that. There's also protecting communities through fire mitigation. So obviously, if you're removing fuels and other grasses, dead shrubs, trees, that you're limiting the effect of wildfire taking off. So that's obviously something that's front of mind for people after the 2017 wildfires that Russ showed earlier. Came very close to the community and dangerously close, and there's evacuation orders. And many of these ecosystems are fire-dependent ecosystems, so they do require fire, and so for seeds to germinate and what have you. So we've got a program now that's evaluating through camera networks. We're able to look at how ungulates, moose, and deer interact with these areas that we've burnt. We're also doing vegetation sampling to look at what grows back after the fires and what are the effect on invasives and species that are coming in. We're also looking at learning from Australia again, the impacts on carbon and other greenhouse gases. What's our effect? So the theory behind this is that if we're removing the potential for catastrophic wildfire that releases many thousands of tons and millions of tons of greenhouse gases. If we're able to mitigate that, what are our carbon savings and greenhouse gas savings from this work? So we've got a program in place now that's examining the feasibility of having a carbon credit derived from this work that we can scale up across Canada. Russ, did you have want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, just on the last point, yeah, just trying to build it to be a sustainable thing that I think right now we're relying on foundation dollars or government grants and stuff like that. And often we're intermingling with government to try to gain access to lands and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's important just try to find access to how to be able to do this in the future and for other First Nations. And then just really focusing on the connection to land piece. Like I think the first year we did this, I think we only had a handful of people, but what we came out with was like just that feeling, like whenever we look at the land, we look at it differently, having done this practice of adding fire. And so whenever we look at the land, and now it's sort of like we have more clarity on like what it might need, or asking what it might need to get to be revitalized or to be renewed in some sort of way.
Russ, did you want to weigh in on this, on these sections about outcomes?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, every year, I think for the most part, we're working within the community of Yunesit'in. So we just sort of identify some of the areas that we want to address, and most of it's like it's focused on grass and trying low intensity, and we sort of couple it with trying to figure out like where the points of like mitigation in terms of trying to prevent future fires to coming into the community, but also applying it to areas that we want restoration to happen, or areas where the fires went through that need more trees or need more shrubs to come into place. So so we've, like last year we were able to hit 150 hectares, which actually is, it's increasing every year as we develop the capacity. I think we only had maybe 30 hectares the first year when we first tested it out. So yeah, I think it's we're moving into more spaces and getting more comfortable with taking on a bit more. And then we have about 4 sites that we kind of corralled off because we have horses and cattle. So we had to kind of corral it off to make sure that they're not eating it, or they're not making sort of an influence on sort of the sites that we want to test. So we want to see what's coming back, every time that we burn.
And this year, I think, Russ, our numbers show that we burnt over 250 hectares. So it's grown significantly. I think in our first year, when we had a kind of a preliminary, our really very first pilot, we started off at 5 hectares, and so that's obviously increased as people have felt more confident with fire, and we're evaluating this work, as Russ mentioned. And I'll just flick over to the next, and just in terms of the people employed, Russ, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah. I mean, so like I think last year we kind of have this sort of open door piece where we try to set we try to have as many people as we can involved as long as the budget allows, and then we try to include people that might want to just test it out for a day or come out just to see what's happening. And so it's an attempt to try to involve the community and not just have it as sort of like trained workers doing it per se. Last year we were able to focus. Well, we didn't target necessarily, but it ended up happening in the spring, where we had probably more than 50% women and a lot of youth. And then we actively try to see whether we can get a couple elders out, just to see what's happening or to sort of inform us on things. And yeah, and then this last year, William sort of highlighted those programs, but we're just having a lot more eyes on the ground in a sense, in terms of the monitoring and evaluation, and and they can lead into more of the guardianship work as well, and just trying to see, yeah, what animals are coming back, like what plants are coming back, and yeah.
And there's a question in terms of, has the community become more involved in the program? And absolutely, it's gone from a smaller core group to expanding. And I think a big part of this has been that we've had an open door policy. We haven't excluded anyone and made it like, oh, you have to be X, Y, Z. We've had a very broad open, and I think, Russ, you had a vision. And you saw some of the work in Australia with a grandmother. You saw a photo and a grandmother and her granddaughter, I think, wearing flip-flops out burning. And that was something that you thought, hey, that resonated with you because you've had your daughter out, right?
Yeah. So yeah, Victor Stephenson, he had a bit of a slide deck that he showed us in the first year, I think 2018, when he was able to come out. And yeah, it had such a big impact on me to see a grandmother and basically just holding a granddaughter's hand while they're on, you see that picture there, but it was sort of on the fire line where the fires are burning, and they're just, see, you realize that it doesn't necessarily need to be this like high tech, highly paid, male dominated, trained workforce that does this work, and nobody else is involved. It had a big impact on me because he knew that it could be families, it can be children, it can be elders, and just that openness to have the whole community involved. And it's inspired me, I guess, to bring my daughter out every year as well, and just have her focused on learning this as well, and and hopefully encouraging other people in other communities to think similarly.
Russ, on this slide, part of the key is cultural burning being a key stewardship tool for land use planning and forestry. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you sort of see cultural burning as a key part of a stewardship tool, a land use tool?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that it's one of the tools that can be used. I think I don't know, I don't want to speak for government, but I just sense that like at government level, they've had a hard time doing this. Like the industry is like, kind of locked in what the strategies are for a long time. And then, during that 2017 fire, I think everyone sort of opened their eyes and said, like, we might need to do this differently, or have to think about how to do this, or how to include Indigenous values, or how to include Indigenous practices. So I think it's sort of something that's actually a topic of conversation. I don't know if it's moved through developing new strategies or policies in a broad way, across BC or across the country, but it's definitely one that sort of lends to, requiring a lot more thoughtful or diligent discussion and piloting more practice around it.
Yeah, Russ, I was going to say that, that there is a lot of planning that goes on, and engaging the community in planning, and also, I think one of the key elements that what we're doing that's different from the province is that we've developed a very holistic community-based evaluation framework around it, not just thinking about, okay, area, how much have we burnt and how much fuel matter have we removed from the landscape, but we're looking at vegetation, the effect on berries and grasses and trees and deer and moose and the community itself. So we're taking a broader lens. Yeah,
I mean, I think even within the community here, think people remember seeing like just massive trees here, like fir trees. They remember, this place was called Gachnatsanechli, which, had, it's a reference to rabbits and sort of a hunting place for rabbits. And yeah, just that need for revival because there isn't as many rabbits as there once was. Or, I remember people talking just about just the berries that used to be here. So there's sort of, people have it in their collective memory, what needs to come back. And, we're just, and for our community to thrive and all that other things, like, we need to be eating our own food. We need to, create, a good forest around ourselves. So that's sort of been part of the objective. And, the more active that our community is in doing that, the more active we know where our foods are, healthier we'll be.
Ross, do you want to talk about some of the partnerships we've developed?
Yeah. So yeah, working with neighbors, there's sort of this idea that we have, the community itself is surrounded by, ranching community, and just sort of being able to sort of tick them off as to what we're doing. I think they experienced 2017 fires the same way we did. They recognize that there needs to be proactive response. So, there's been, there's I think people are hesitant about fire because they see it as sort of a threat as well. But but I think the more confidence we have in people, the more confidence they have in us. And then they're working with BC Wildfire Service, so they've offered capacity. We have sort of ongoing discussions, trying to gain, access to different lands outside the community. And so there's been these promising conversations that have started to happen. And they've offered contracts, and they're trying to keep it in mind. And I think we've gone 2 years, this last spring and the spring before, where we've worked together on a site. And so we're also learning together. They're learning how we organize, how we look at low intensity burning. I think they take a more militant approach on how they organize, and they, if they want to burn something, they got their they got their torches, they got their little leaf blowers, and they want to go on a quick pace. And it's more about just kind of getting the job done, and blocking out everything. But so they've got to sort of see our side of it and see the low intensity burn, and see it can be like more of a casual kind of work environment. And then working with Gathering Voices Society and UBC. So this is, we're leaning on people, we're leaning on funds to be able to sort of support us in this work. And then sort of national and international networks. William might have to touch more on this, but it got, advisors and people like Victor Stephenson and people that are involved in the support, or people that are doing this stuff or thinking about, carbon at a larger level. So
yeah, and there is a global movement around Indigenous peoples reclaiming fire, and local communities in parts of Europe as well, where our relationship with fire has changed over time. Instead of seeing it as a tool, we've seen it as a master and something to be feared. And so this global movement is really around reclaiming fire and as a tool, because we're seeing high intensity, seriously damaging wildfires across the world. And so how do we address this point, because our approach isn't working. And so as we move into hotter and dry climates, I mean, Russ, what's the temperature out at Stone right now? It's you've probably never seen temperatures very often like this out at this time of year. It's we're coming into mid-October.
Yeah, I mean, it's about 20, 25, but luckily today it started off at a freezing point. So
yeah. So, one of the things we're having to learn with is a more fire prone landscape, fire risks. So we really need these approaches to be able to coexist with fire. And there's a lot of interest in around how Indigenous approaches to managing fire and stewarding fire can be adopted at broader scales. One of the things that we've been really successful at, Russ, and I think you can sort of talk about this as well, is that we've been able to use different forms of knowledge mobilization, video and other forms to document the work we're doing, because it's as Victor would say, the use of video is very similar to oral traditions, story, and so we've been very successful in being able to capture a lot of our work, whether it be Victor coming or starting the fire program, our work during COVID and strengthening the program. And that's been used not only in the community, but it's also useful for building public awareness and our neighbors' awareness around the work we're doing, so that people are able to come along on this journey as well and learn how to do it. And it can give people the confidence to do this work as well.
Yeah, no, I think the first year we did the filming, I think we were just starting just to show that we prove that we could actually do it. I think if we actually asked government to see whether we could do it or not, we might have got like no's right off the bat. So we just did it ourselves and just wanted to prove that we could do it and show other people that they're able to do it. And I think it's definitely carried on. I think people are quite inspired by watching it, and knowing that there's an Indigenous group that's out there doing it, and it's built probably more publicity than we probably used to at Yunesit'in. I think a lot of people here are pretty shy and don't want to be on media anywhere. So, but it's we even get calls in from the BBC or people requesting to do documentaries. So yeah, it's been good, and I think it's been a good source to show people what we're doing, and and it's also just internally it's good just to document it too, because Victor Stephenson he like when he was sharing with us, they do an intense amount of videoing, but it's more to like document the land and how it's recovering and seeing it from year to year. And and I see that value as well when we're able to have those photographs and be able to see like how the land is changing. I think it'll have huge benefits down the road.
We've also published in the academic literature, there's a couple more articles since this that have been published, and Russell and I have spoken about some of the the steps that we've taken it was recently published in Forestry Chronicle. So we've also not only done the sort of video knowledge mobilization that is very accessible to the community. Young people watch it. We get 3-4-year-olds that love our videos, and so that for us is like a big win, because I as an academic, my kids ask, "Hey Dad, can you show us what we do?" And you show them an academic paper and their eyes glaze over, but you show them our videos and they get really excited, and it engages people more broadly and gives people a chance to engage with our work at a very deep level from all walks of life. So one of the things we've been focused on is how do we maintain program sustainability over the long term. And so, as Russell mentioned, we've had different sources of funding. At the beginning, it was very hard to get government funding for this work because they just saw it as a risk. Indigenous fire stewardship, you're going to be putting fire to the land. It was, very outside the box. That's changed in the last few years. And so we're able to access a broader array of funding, but we're thinking long term, and we're learning from the Australian context about how we could develop a carbon credit from our work, and we've got programs in evaluation, a project in place to evaluate how we could do that right now. We're also trying to build a broader public business case for this work around health and well-being. And, this isn't just about fire mitigation. It's not about biodiversity, but it's also about people's health and well-being, and fire stewardship as a public health tool intervention that's consistent with Indigenous people's worldviews and ways of knowing and norms. And so that's something that we've been very focused on, is how do we make this a full-time, long-term program? So I think some of the highlights that, we've got this learning by doing approach that is very grounded in Indigenous knowledge and strengthening and rebuilding Indigenous knowledge. And we've got elders and other people from other communities, Australia, that we're able to construct this knowledge as we go about knowledge about fire and fire stewardship. And so we're rebuilding that knowledge as we go through it. And so we're heading into our 5th year of doing this work, and we've learned a lot over that time, and through that we're able to slowly build a governance approach to what we're doing, figuring out how do we govern this. And it doesn't necessarily look like what you would see a textbook case of governance. It's very organic, and as Russ would say, it's sort of amoebic in a way, how it grows and evolves, but it's working, and in doing that we're able to build capacity as well. And then we're also building this holistic evaluation framework. So we're building an evidence base. We're building our knowledge as we go and about what the work we're doing. So, yeah, thank you. And we can turn it over to question and answers.
We have a couple questions here. So the first question is, have the community members become more involved as the project proceeds, or have they kind of gradually come and go as they choose to come?
Yeah, I mean, William was mentioning, and I mentioned earlier too, our first year, we only had about a handful of people, maybe 5. When we first tested it out. So, I mean, I definitely think we've gone from 5 to about 30 in the spring. So we've definitely evolved from where we're at. Our community is about 430 or 480 people, and then about 250 that live in the community. So it's, I think we could evolve at a little faster pace, but I think it's, considering our timeline, I think we're doing pretty good. There's moments where, sometimes we might only have a group for, one, they might only be able to come out one time, and they might not be able to come out the next time because they found more reliable work, or they have another job or something like that. So yeah, I think that's one of the struggles that, trying to build a program that's so, it's so specific on a certain time. It's really just April, and it's really just October, and it's sort of you can't build a full year-round employment strategy out of that. So that's why I sort of say it's a little bit amoebic, or it changes, and it's always in flux. So I think it's fine in a sense, as long as we continue to have a bit of a core group, and then they're able to learn. And it's probably what I enjoyed most in the spring was that a lot of this work it can be kind of slow as you watch the fires go, but then it gives you a chance to for the people that know more, to be able to sort of chat on the side with people, and just sort of show ask how you're doing, or this is how it was last year. This is what you might expect the fire to do. Some people sometimes might easily freak out about something, but you're no, just relax, or let it go, let the fire go. Or so there's a lot of I don't know, little learning things, and it's always good to have a bit of a core group where they're able to sort of teach along the way. So I think to be honest, I feel like it would be nice to have a little bit more, community engagement, in the sense of like having, our leaders, there and involved at certain points just for morale or for, and then also, people just to like come around and see what's happening. And it's happened to some degree. There's some of the interest is there, and then I've had a couple people ask like, can you do this spot for us and this spot for us? So we have to sort of like consciously figure out on the timeline how we can just try to be more of a community benefit as well. So yeah, I'll share that. But I think it's evolving, and I think the more people that even get that 1 year or that, that slice of a year experience, I think it benefits them a lot. Just being able to like, even like I said, like read the land differently or see the land differently.
Definitely, like you can tell that it's bringing back that stewardship to the land and that connection to the land and the responsibility to the land too, as community members and people of the land. So that's awesome. That's really great. And for cultural burning, can you describe what cultural burning is and why it's important to the community?
I don't know. I don't have a good definition for it. Like I think even our names, the name of defining it is sort of changing as well. Because you might have one community, like I heard a Secwepemc community that said cultural burning is like they attribute it more to like I think like cremation or something like that. So it might have been a different term or but and then sometimes I'm referring it to more as like fire stewardship, or my uncle who just passed this year, he described it broadly as nen anatin, which is just working the land. But for us, it's just applying fire to mostly grass, and it's a low intensity burn. So my first year, it was quite a revelation, because you expect like it to burn and that it burns everything on the ground, but no, the beauty of it is that like, it's only like a few seconds of a burn, and then when you see, especially in the spring and the aftermath, is you see the beauty of the fluorescent green of grass that's underneath it that still survives and still it's ready to go. So for us, the burning is mostly grass, and it's trying to stay out of, it's trying to keep that white smoke as opposed to the blue smoke that has the oils in it from trees or from like larger shrubs. And it's, and I guess for me, it's mostly trying to get, the old grass, that is most likely to ignite or, cause problems in forest fires. It's sort of burning that under layer of yellow grass that exists. So, and the idea, I think, is just that the more that you burn that, the greener, the more lush, and likely more resistant to bringing in wildfires.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know with my community in the Silk Okanagan area, my uncles call it cleansing the land and like making sure that, like you said, the green grass is there for the animals to come, and kind of a little bit easier for us to access the berry spots, and like you were saying earlier in your presentation. That's awesome. And then our next question is, what's the difference between prescribed burning and cultural burning?
Yeah, I might take another stab at that. I mean, I think, yeah, like I say, like my definitions are kind of all over the place. I definitely don't rely on any textbooks to describe it, but when I hear prescribed burning, sometimes I think it's more around mitigation, or controlled burning is another term, I think, BC Wildfire Service might use, but I think it's more about mitigation. It's not about necessarily restoring a type of vegetation in a certain area, or looking at sort of the future of what the the question of whether we're bringing back trees or bringing back grassland or bringing back berries. I don't think that is part of the equation for, say, like the BC Wildfire Service, where I think they did a project on the highways, but I think it was mostly to like prevent those people that are like throwing their cigarette butts out the end in their car and starting those fires. They burn like maybe to the fence line or whatever from outside of either side of the on the highway. But yeah, that's purely mitigation. And but I think for the cultural stuff, yeah, it's just trying to bring that regeneration back and that renewal for certain types of vegetation.
Thank you. And how can allies who are not in the community support your work and efforts?
Good question. I think for Yunesit'in, a lot of the work, Gathering Voices does a lot of the fundraising side of things. Like, I honestly don't think we would have the ability to, like, say, test and pilot and get a head start on a lot of this work without additional funding, to like whether it's like to the foundations or that we rely on, or so yeah, obviously, like, financing is key, because like I think if we were to ask government, we might, they've offered a couple contracts, but the contracts are generally thinking about a certain type of a certain type of group. It's like kind of the firefighting crew, and then the requirements of like insurance, the requirements of like medical person and equipment and vehicle, and you start adding up like all the different types of equipment, and and so it becomes this like expensive project. And for a large part, like I think we've had these discussions with government where we're trying to create sort of a bit of a hybrid, having sort of there's sort of like those very technical parts to the operation, but also just allowing the community to sort of be themselves and be able to participate without so many restrictions, or so that's sort of like that's sort of an ongoing conversation. But actually can't remember. Can you rephrase the question so make sure I answer it?
Oh yeah, so the question was, what was it? I think it was, how can allies who are not in the community support your work and efforts?
Great. Yeah. So yeah, my main thing was the financing piece. But I think there's also just that public support as well. Like I think and I don't know how much government goes out of their way to like ask people about whether this is good or not, but I think they've done in some circumstances, if I recall, and people are actually afraid of fire. So we still see it as like a tool to prevent future fires, as long as you're doing it in the right season and doing it with the right personnel. But people are generally scared of fires and they don't want smoke around. So it can be an obstacle on sort of like the public. And even though there's a lot of like public discussion and there's probably movement in government around trying to figure out how to like make this happen and work with Indigenous communities, there's I still think there's probably still a lot more like public support that needs to happen to sort of like make it clear to like move it forward. So yeah, I don't know, William, if you think of any other tangible ways for support.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that it's about raising public awareness, and I think that if people can actively raise their awareness, it builds their active citizenship around taking informed, looking to inform themselves about what's happening and what's best practice. And I think that an informed citizenship and support from allies through that citizenship, that informed citizenship, is a really critical way, I think, a first step that people can start to support us, because arming yourself with information, in best practice and evidence, I think is a critical piece of supporting this kind of work.
Yeah, another thought too, it's like I was thinking of right now, I like the way I feel is that I'm enclosed to my community, so basically the reserve. And while there's ongoing conversations about how to do this on like South Cotean/Crown land, I often say that for us to keep the research projects going, consistency, all that sort of stuff, it requires like a long-term commitment over a certain portion of land. And so, yeah, it sort of begs the question of like, jurisdiction, land claims, like authority over the land, like, that's probably needed, because we, Gathering Voices Society, also working with Honey Gwiteen, which is sort of where the declared Aboriginal title exists. So we kind of have this tale of two stories right now. One that's on title land, and they have the ability to like chart out their own path. They have the governance system to like accept this, and then you contrast that to where the government's at. And right now I think it's more of a default practice at this point. But to develop a burn plan, it's expensive. Like it could be $2,000 to $5,000 to develop for technical support, and then you have to push it through the referral system, and that could take sometimes up to a year and 5 different signatures to do, and it could end up in internal wrangling. But it also it might give you assurance for a year or two of work, but it doesn't give you the long-term stability. So yeah, so you can see why I say that public support is needed. Is like it's needed for the long-term viability of something like this. But yeah, so there just needs to be a lot more like thought and tools on how to do that. But a lot of it could probably be alleviated if there was further movement on land claims and jurisdictional issues.
You described some of the barriers with cultural burning. Can you describe like any additional ones that you haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking there's like probably internal barriers as well, like even within our own community, making sure that we're organized enough and mobilized, and we've got the money and equipment and all that sort of stuff. Like sometimes the most basic barriers, making sure that we have enough resources to have people have good footwear or gloves and the basic stuff, and some of the equipment. But yeah, but externally, like it, yeah, sort of just the things that I mentioned around just government relations. Like if we're to go out, like one example was like in January, I think we were invited to a discussion around doing a tactical plan, which would be a large piece of area over a long portion of time. And initially we sort of put our foot in the door, had the initial conversation. It was a direct award by government, but then when you go further down into the planning of giving that direct award, you find out that there's only 3 people in the province that can actually do this type of work. And so and all three of those people were busy, and so they didn't actually direct award us the work to develop the tactical plan. So I don't know, there's like just funny examples like that. I think that yeah, they just show some of the barriers, because we saw that as sort of possibly being a chance to, like, you know, not only do other fire mitigation type work over areas that surround us, so like kind of just beyond our community, but a fair size of land. And if we had that in place, then we'd be able to control like where we do the burns and where have a lot longer term idea of where we should target. So yeah, so that's sort of up in the air right now.
Thank you for answering that. And then you kind of touched on this for earlier about getting involved. But are there any qualifications that you guys need to do this work, or is it just like, do you have to just be a community member? Like what else, what other qualifications do you need?
Yeah, good question. I think where like the BC Wildfire Service wants us is they would probably prefer to have one contact that has a burn boss qualifications. So I don't know in terms of like what that means in terms of like the type of training that they do or how long it takes. I know they've been trying to push it on me a little bit, but I kind of resist. Like my anticipation is that I kind of want to be in this gray area where I don't want to like be, I want to learn as we go in a sense, and not be like told that I have to have these qualifications or, you know, have to like fit their box to sort of exist and do this on our own land. So we're kind of like doing the tightrope kind of, you know, trying to still sort of, you know, chart our own path as best we can, but also knowing that we have to sort of negotiate with government on different things on how we can move forward with it. So.
Thank you for answering that. And yes, I know what you mean. Like you want to kind of decolonize the way of doing this work but also like still doing the work, which is a little bit challenging. And then I just have a question for William. How are you integrating this, what you're learning from the Yunesit'in community into your curriculum with the forestry?
So there's lots of learnings. We've at forestry, we had a First Nations curriculum steering committee that we developed a new 4-year degree program that's been approved through UBC Senate and signed off on by the Minister of Advanced Education. So it's a Bachelor of Indigenous-led Stewardship. So we bring knowledge keepers and others into the classroom, and we combine it with Western science to train students to be able to learn from two ways. So that really two-eyed seeing approach, we try and bring that into the classroom, and that's going to be starting, hopefully, if we can get all the things in place in next September. We'll be admitting our first cohort of students. So yeah, there's a whole new program, 4-year degree, which is the first of its kind.
That's awesome. And thank you both for answering the questions. We are really happy and thankful to have you guys both present. We have no more questions. So thank you to our panelists and to everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much for Russell and William for an amazing discussion. It was great to learn about restoration, maintenance, land stewardship, and cultural burnings. And just before we end the webinar, we would love to bring your attention to our upcoming learning circles. So we have Keepers of the Water, protecting water in the Arctic Basin and the current threats to the water. That's on October 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we have co-building cultural competency and Indigenous engagement in the CanSolve CKD network. That's on October 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we have Plains Indian Sign Language storytelling on November 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for the great discussion. So just sign up for our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. All webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningsircle.ubc.ca. And thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next Learning Circle. Lim Lim, thank you.